So I'm out here by the lake again, getting my vitamin D shot from the sun. And I was just listening to a video that dospook posted, a conversation between he and Gary in Mendham and Sherwolf. Um, and they were talking about language mostly, and the difficulties of trying to articulate truth to one another. And of course, Gary has his own perspective on what the truth is and how we ought to use the language to articulate it. For him, the truth is that we know enough about reality, even though much of reality remains too complex for us to grasp. We know enough to tell a story that, rather convincingly shows how meaningless and crude and really harsh the process is, and it would ultimately be better if we could just end the whole game, because the game is not worth playing from Gary's perspective. I think dospook is more of I don't know, maybe not a relativist, but certainly has embraced a sort of postmodern perspectivalism or contextualism that really revels in ambiguity and in the infinite complexity, not only of reality but of language. And I guess he begins to recognize the way that language itself is an expression of reality, and so the normal picture of what language does, I think the kind of a picture that Gary is trying to paint of language would suggest that its basic mode of operation is representational. In other words, language is trying to represent or provide us with a sort of mental picture of an independently existing world, an objective world of things in space and time. And what dospook seems to be gesturing towards is this idea that no, language itself is, if you want, one of the objects, one of the things in the world, and that whatever it's doing can't possibly be construed as representational as a mind coming to know an object or nature that itself is dead, independent, and mechanical, but rather whatever language is, it seems to be, it's not so much a scientific thing as it is an artistic thing. And if language is the basis of math and therefore the basis of science, then science ultimately is, not only is it a cultural activity, but it's an artistic expression. And it's a particular kind of art, right? Each art form has its own instruments and its own objects, its own lures, its own sense of what is beautiful. And the science as an art is trying to express the inner essence of nature, whereas, say, painting is trying to express the inner essence of our visual experience of color. They're specialized, painting and natural science, and of course there's really no natural science in general. There's scientific specializations that get into very focused and sort of isolated experimental conditions of nature, so that you have even slightly less generally, but still generally, physics, chemistry, biology, psychology, anthropology, theology, maybe, if you want. And each of these sciences is, it focuses on a particular slice of reality and sort of brackets all the rest and leaves it to the side so that, maybe you can deal with it later after you've done your physics, whatever. But, the point is that science is multiple. Science is full of different subspecies of investigation, and that I guess what I'm saying is that, yeah, the scientific process is a process of discovery, but it's also a creative process. Just like art is a creative process, but art is also, I think artists and appreciators of artwork will both want to defend the idea that art, that artwork is also, it leaves open the possibility for discovery, just like science, and that in fact, the history of art is just as much an adventure, sort of launching into the unknown and discovering new things about what it means to be capable of experiencing beauty in various ways. So, I would definitely want to take this approach that dospook is taking, a sort of artistic paradigm rather than this sort of classical scientific paradigm that would, try to argue that there is only one right way of knowing, namely the scientific method, and that everything else is sort of just illusion, maybe a nice pastime to kind of help us cope with basically meaningless reality that we're forced to suffer through, but that, really if we want the truth, we have to focus only on science and what the scientific method produces. As I tried to describe just before, I think this is a caricature of art, but it's also a caricature of science and the scientific method that, from my perspective, which I guess most people would want to refer to as a sort of postmodern take on science, there is no such thing as capital S science. There is no one uniformly agreed upon and practiced scientific method. I mean, we can describe something vague like, the generation or construction of falsifiable theories that can, be tested, and that the experiment can be reproduced and reviewed by a group of trained peers, and all of this. We can talk about the sort of form that scientific institutions take, but each scientific fact that is produced by science has a local origin, in some more or less well-funded laboratory, and that funding comes from particular other institutions, government or state institutions, private institutions, and there's a whole cultural and economic context within which scientific facts are produced and constructed, and that to take those facts as just finished products and to neglect the process that brought them to be leads to, I think, a kind of inflated view of what science can actually provide for us, as though it transcended all the other socially constructed activities that we engage in as human beings on a day-to-day basis. Now, I'm not saying that scientific facts aren't true. I'm trying to say that truth is itself a historically embedded phenomenon. It's truth is an event which reveals itself to a community of human beings in a particular place and time, and to try to arrive at some final truth, which would be true for all people across all times, I think, as Gary seems to want to do, like to fix the definition of every word so that it would refer unambiguously to an object or a mechanical process in the world. I think that's it's a very strange form of theology, really. It's the idea that there is this God's eye perspective, and that God is like the perfect calculator, a sort of mathematical God. This is a kind of deism. It's a very classical understanding of science, a sort of Cartesian or Newtonian understanding of science, and I think it's just been very convincingly proven and shown by hundreds of years of scholarship and philosophical critique and anthropological investigation, and that this Cartesian Newtonian picture of science as the pursuit of certain knowledge of an independently existing external world, it doesn't hold any water anymore. It's not relevant to our current understanding of the universe. Um, the universe is not made up of independently subsisting things in empty space and homogeneous time. The universe is a growing energy event, a complexifying um, adventure that, as far as we can tell, has been going on for 13 or 14 billion years. And uh, really, what we've recognized with everything we've learned about the universe in the last century is that um, it's not um, a dead object. It's a creative life form, and this is where I think I also agree with dospook that we need to begin to take seriously an organic rather than the old mechanistic paradigm. That to understand what science, natural science, is really telling us about the quantum and relativistic and evolutionary nature of our universe is that it's organic, it's self-organizing, it's alive, and that its behaviors are not deterministic, because if we look at the history of the universe, we can see that there are various emergent events which have taken place that could not have been predicted beforehand, and that based on that history, we must assume that in the future there will emerge new forms of organization that we never could have foreseen. Certainly after the fact, we can give some causal account. We can list a whole set of reasons why this was made possible by what came before, but we couldn't have seen it coming. So, one of the words that Gary thinks we need to sort of erase from our language is spontaneity, because he doesn't think it's consistent with our physical, rational understanding of the world. But, you may not like quantum physics, but that doesn't change the fact that it is the most successful scientific field that human beings have yet stumbled upon, where success is measured by its ability to predict with a fine degree of accuracy the behavior of some isolated field of nature. Quantum physics works, and what we can say about it is that it shows that at the most fundamental level, the universe is a spontaneously emergent creative field where everything is connected to everything else, and where each moment is a sort of actualization of novelty, a sort of rhythmic pulsation that with each repetition creatively differentiates itself from the repetition just prior, where if we were going to try to have some, it makes the idea of having some objective description of this process as though it were just things in external space and homogeneous linear time. It makes that whole model seem irrelevant, like a child's play toy or something. Like, what we've learned scientifically is that we're inside of the process that we're trying to describe, and that as a result, if we try to use the model, the old subject-object sort of Cartesian model of what scientific knowledge is all about, we end up confusing ourselves with all of these paradoxes, like non-locality, and the strange paradoxes of relativistic physics, the so-called warping and bending of space and time. These seem rather counterintuitive if we're in the old classical paradigm, where everything is separate from everything else, and what there finally is are just material bodies in space-time. we have to move beyond the mechanistic paradigm, not only because it's wrong in a factual sense, but because it's because it ignores values as a legitimate aspect of what nature is and what nature is all about. Because the mechanistic paradigm treats nature as just a purposeless mechanism, it's destroying the ecosystems of the earth. If there ever was a test of the classical mechanistic understanding of nature, it would have been the last few hundred years of industrial techno-capitalism. And clearly science doesn't understand, techno-science doesn't understand how the earth does what it does. Because it's the economic system and the political system that the science has fostered, this old kind of science has fostered, is not well adapted to its actual environment. This is the thing, like science as an activity is part of the life process of human being and becoming. And if we're going to say that our science is empirical and experimental and based in actual experience, then we need to recognize that our actual experience is as an organism in an evolving ecology of other organisms. And if our science, if our knowledge isn't adapted to its environment and isn't sort of mutually enhancing the lives of all the other organisms that we share our environment with, then that knowledge is going to go extinct. It's going to drive itself into extinction because it's not fitting in. It's not, and this isn't a matter, of coming to correspond to an outside world, right? The idea of science and our language adapting to our environment, our social, ecological environment, it's not a matter of correspondence, it's more a matter of coherence. Like how can I and the other organisms I coexist with continue to bring forth reality together? Of course we need to be able to communicate using a language that's not so ambiguous that we talk past one another, but then again not so definite, defined, and washed clean of all ambiguity that it becomes sterile and pointless. Just mere information being transferred. There needs to be some slippage, right, in our semantics in order for us to learn from each other, to enter into dialectic, and to grow together. So, yeah, it was an hour-long video that I'm responding to, and I've already gone on for 20 minutes here, and I haven't really touched on everything I'd like to say. But I guess I got pretty close, so I'll leave it at that for now. Well, one more thing. Right at the end of their video, dospook and Gary started talking about special knowledge, and the idea that it could be that either through scientific training or through the spiritual path and arriving at some kind of spiritual enlightenment, one can gain special knowledge, right? And I think this isn't just a matter of spiritual enlightenment, right? It's also, all of the facts that Gary wants to draw upon to tell his story of a crude mechanical universe are facts that are really only understood by small collections of experts, and that there's no scientific institution, at least, that fosters the development of coordination between all of these different scientific facts, right? The idea of, there are systems theorists, but when you start to do systems theory, when you start to try to coordinate all of the various facets of nature that the many, many thousands of scientific disciplines that have emerged over the last few hundred years have revealed to us, you're going to need to start doing philosophy, ultimately, right? And the philosopher's challenge, I think, is to try to translate all of this expert knowledge, whether it's the expert knowledge of spiritual practitioners, or it's the expert knowledge of scientists. The philosopher is trying to communicate all of that, to translate it into the vernacular, to the common language, so that knowledge can be transformative of actual life. So, this makes the philosopher, if you want, both a scientist and an artist. Or neither a scientist nor an artist, but some kind of a higher order. Philosophy is a higher order activity that tries to consider science, art, and religion as an integral whole, as part of the same experiential complex, or gestalt. So, yeah, I guess that's my 2 cents. I really enjoy these philosophy and art video series. This video series that dospook's been doing. I think you should keep doing it, and I'd love to have a conversation with any of you guys, really. So drop me a line. Thanks for listening.